Now, they have crippled the Met Police, left MPs fearing for their safety and cost the taxpayer at least $25 million in just 5 months. I'm talking about the pro-Palestine protesters that come out on the streets of London every weekend to cause their own brand of chaos, from shutting down bridges to beaming anti-Semitic messages onto Parliament.
Gaza demonstrations across London have already wasted more than 26,000 Met Police shifts, calling into question whether it's finally time to ban them. Well, let's discuss this further with Tom Wilson, Director of Police at the Director of Policy at the Counter Extremism Group, and with Paul Harris, Editor of the Jewish Telegraph. Tom, I'm going to start with you because today, a lot of the conversation surrounding what's going on our streets, the security and safety of MPs, is being equally combated or perhaps drowned out or eclipsed by the discussion about what is or isn't Islamophobic to say. And I understand that you've actually written a report basically on this subject and how this could eventually, if these accusations of Islamophobia could have a negative effect when it comes to policing extremism.
Well, certainly one of the definitions that's been proposed for how to define Islamophobia could be quite problematic for a whole range of issues, policing terrorism being one of them, but also basic free speech. I mean, I think this is something of a charade that we seem to go through every time there's a major story about Islamism and Islamist terrorism, which is that MPs in Parliament said that they were so fearful of threats, essentially, that they had to ask the Speaker to breach parliamentary procedure so that they could vote in a particular way. So that's quite a serious situation. But instead of discussing that, we're discussing what language certain Conservative Party politicians have used in response to that. It seems to me as though we're not really going to be able to get to grips with the issue of the threat of Islamist terrorism if every time this happens, instead we have to talk about what's the appropriate language to use.
Absolutely. Let's concentrate on nasty words and not the important issues. Can we come to you now, Paul Harris, Editor of the Jewish Telegraph? Thank you for joining us. I mean, I actually believe that these marches, these protests should be allowed. You know, we have the right to protest. Whether or not I agree with them is irrelevant. But what I would like them to be is within the bounds of the law. I'm sorry that it's costing the police a lot of money, but they've got to do their jobs. We're allowed to protest in this country. They have to police those marches. What I'd like to ask you is, why does the police stand by and let these protesters project onto Parliament a message of genocidal hatred from the river to the sea? Why do they let them chant this in these marches? Why do they let them chant jihad, which is, of course, a call to annihilation, the annihilation of the Jewish people, and so on and so forth? What I would like to see is the police policing these marches properly so that they were lawful protests, because I don't think they are at the moment.
I would tend to agree. There is a danger to barring free speech if the marches were to be stopped by law. On this station, I discussed last Friday the issue of the fact that the police don't actually seem to know what to do. They don't actually seem to know how they're supposed to interpret the law and what is anti-Semitic, what is illegal, what is just anti-Zionism. And I think this is the crux of the problem. You only have to look at these demonstrations. They are intimidating, they're threatening, not just in London, in Manchester and other parts of the country as well. And you compare them with the pro-Israel rallies that have been held, which are peaceful. These pro-Palestinian rallies, you've got baying mobs, and anybody passing by, anybody actually getting involved, caught up in it accidentally, is actually going to be petrified, let alone just Jewish people.
Tom, I want to come back to you, someone who is a counter-extremism expert. You've been working in this domain for a very long time. When we talk about these marches, there have been various reports come out, one from your old colleague, Robin Simcox, who is now an advisor to the government on counter-extremism. And he said, look, there are groups involved with organising these marches, and some of those groups are very unsavoury. They indeed may have links to prescribed organisations, including Hamas. In your opinion, are there extreme elements of these marches, and do they pose some sort of risk to the public?
Well, I think it's undeniable about the level of extremism that's taking place on these marches, both from some of the organisers, also, from the placards that we've seen there, and from the kinds of chants that we've seen, which is shocking. We've seen people celebrating Hamas and also groups like the Houthis, a terrorist organization that's been firing rockets at British ships. This is the kind of thing that Prevent should be getting to grips with. And, politicians, particularly conservative politicians, are using some strong language at the moment about what's been going on. But I think they need to answer why it is that they've not properly implemented the recommendations from the Prevent review from William Shawcross, who said that Prevent was not focusing enough on Islamist extremism, that they needed to extend the legal Prevent duty onto immigration and asylum because of the threat that we have seen from a number of individuals who've come from overseas conflict zones, and to get to grips with things like blasphemy. The government promised guidance on that, still yet to come. So there's a lot of strong language coming out, but the kind of action that we would want to see to push back against these narratives and to disrupt some of these activities hasn't been happening. And I think that's what people in government should be answering.
Can we come back to you, Paul? I don't think we've heard from you, certainly on this show, yet about this. Where do you stand on Lee Anderson's assertion that the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has handed over this city to what he called his mates? He meant his Muslim mates. My feeling about that, for what it's worth, is I don't think that's true. I don't think there's any evidence that he's divided up City Hall between his Muslim friends. But I think, clumsily, what Lee Anderson was trying to say is that at the weekends, the streets appear to have been handed over to big Muslim marches. Paul Scully, the former London minister, said there are no-go areas within Muslim areas in London and Birmingham. Again, I'm not sure that's true, but what I think you would agree with is, it's not a great idea for a Jewish person at the moment to march through the streets of central London on a Saturday when one of these pro-Palestine marches are unfolding. So what are your feelings about Lee Anderson's views on Sadiq Khan and the streets of London?
Well, I'm a Mancunian, I live in Manchester, but I don't particularly like to hear this type of rhetoric. When you say it's not safe for a Jewish person to go through some of these areas, well, it would be as long as they were not easily identifiable as Jewish, i.e. Dressed in obvious Jewish garb or sporting Star of David or something like that. But I would say anybody outwardly Jewish, somebody ultra-Orthodox, they most certainly would not feel safe walking through any of those areas, either in London or Manchester or elsewhere. But I don't actually like to hear that type of rhetoric.
Tom, back to you. We are usually made more aware by the risk of extremism in our country when we see certain flashpoints, if there's been a terrorist attack, and then we move on and things go quiet for a while after the Manchester Arena bombing, of course, prior to that, 7/7. It seems to me that it's being brought back to the fore again. What is the level of threat right now in society? At one point, we used to have these constant traffic light updates. Do you remember those? That we were sort of risk level something when it comes to threats to public security and safety. Where would you position us now?
I think that it's a live threat, that there is going to be some kind of violence connected to what's going on around the Gaza conflict. There, in fact, already was, shortly after the 7th of October, there was an incident in Hartlepool. We don't know exactly what happened there. Somebody was murdered, and we're waiting to see what comes out of the trial. But I think that it's highly likely that that we are going to see individuals who've been radicalized, essentially, off the back of these events at some point in the future, engaging in violence. The level of rhetoric that we're seeing both online and at these rallies, at speeches, you only have to go down and listen to the chants. Just the entire atmosphere is incredibly charged right now. And I think that the organizers of these demonstrations bear some responsibility for that. And I would question why it is that they're not being held to account. If you organize events week after week, and every single one of them, there's some form of incitement or there's some form of celebration of terrorism, after a while, don't these people stand culpable for that? That's what I think the authorities should be engaging with. Why are the organisers not being held to account for what's happening on their events?
Go back to you, Paul. Can we get to grips with this phrase, this slogan, from the river to the sea? Because it's come into sharp focus. At the beginning of all these marches, we were told, oh, that is a message of hate. That's a hate crime, a potential hate crime, because what you're calling for is the annihilation of the Jewish people and the obliteration of the Jewish state. It is a song of genocide, you might say. The reason I'm asking you this now is Charlotte Church, the singer, staged a big gathering in Wales, in Caerphilly, a few days ago, and sang From the River to the Sea. She said that was a message of union, of peace. Do you agree with me that From the River to the Sea is a hate slogan?
Of course, it's a hate slogan, and I'm sure Charlotte Church is aware of that. It's hardly a peaceful message, this. We all know the connotation, the clear message is it's the annihilation of Israel, the taking over of the entire land of Israel by Palestinians. So I think it's laughable. I'm sure she must know that what she's saying is not true.
Paul Harris, sir, thank you so much for talking to you. Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
And to Tom Wilson, Director of Policy at the Counter Extremism Group.